Myself, Dr. Bobby Basu, Faculty Heritage Business School, take this privilege to welcome you all to this webinar organized by Heritage Business School. Heritage Business School started its journey in the year 2003 under the Heritage Group of Institutions and Branch Management Program. It is affiliated to Maulana Abul Kalam Azad University of Technology and is approved by All India Council of Technical Education. Now, under the visionary leadership of our top management, Heritage Business School has achieved many accolades. To name a few in the recent past, Heritage Business School has been awarded as the best education brand by ET Edge and Initiative by Economic Times in 2020. And also, Heritage Business School has been declared as the most preferred school in 2020 in the East at the 13th ASSOCHAM Higher Education Forum. Now, at HBS Kolkata, apart from academics, we organize industry institute interface sessions where we invite experts from corporate houses and academia to share their vast experience with our students so as to enhance their practical knowledge. Today, we are very happy to have amongst us Sri Shubir Chakraborty, Deputy Managing Director, Exide Industries. A very warm welcome to you, sir. As we know that we live in a VUCA world where rapid and unpredictable change has become the norm, I'm sure everybody knows what does this VUCA actually mean. VUCA is the acronym for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Here V stands for volatility. That means the changes are very fast, leading to a volatile and uncontrollable environment. U stands for uncertainty, meaning the future is unpredictable, making it hard for us to prepare for. And so it is very difficult to use the patterns or the previous events to predict the future or the outcome. C stands for complexity. That means there are multiple number of factors which are at play from within as well as outside the organizations, and there exists unpredictable interaction among these factors. And finally, A stands for ambiguity, which means lots of confusion is there because of this volatile, uncertain, and complex environment. In fact, our VUCA world is highly disruptive. Now, the pandemic situation has changed the lives of our lives altogether, the way we used to work, as well as the way we used to live in. Work from home has become the new normal. Now, in this pandemic situation, in this VUCA world caused by this pandemic situation, it is really very, very challenging for the leaders to navigate the organization as well as the employees. So we are very thankful to Mr. Shubir Chakraborty, who has accepted our invitation and will be delivering his lecture on a very relevant topic for the time, that is leading an organization in VUCA times. Without any further ado, I would now request our director, sir, Dr. Jain Mukhopadhyay, to formally introduce our speaker of the day and take forward the session. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Bobby. Good afternoon to all of you. On behalf of the Heritage Group of Institutions, the Heritage Business School, and on my personal behalf, I want to accord a very warm welcome to our keynote speaker, Shubir Chakraborty. We are also very happy that some very, very notable persons, very respected persons like Mr. Sudhir Chand, who was the director of Exide and who's the director in many large number of companies, and our faculty members, and Mr. Nandan Sengupta, who was one of the keynote speakers from London, has joined us. So I've got many distinguished people from Bombay also who joined us today. So a formal introduction of Mr. Chakraborty. Mr. Shubir Chakraborty has done his graduation in mechanical engineering from IIT Madras, and then he worked for 2 years with Indian Aluminum Company, which was a leading aluminum company then, before joining IIM Calcutta to complete his post-graduation in management. After his post-graduation, he joined Berger Paints as a product manager, where he worked for 2 years, and thereafter he joined Balmoral & Company, which is a public sector company, but it actually operates like a multinational. So he started with the marketing function and gradually rising to the position of a profit center head. After 8 years with Bamalori, Mr. Chakravarti joined Exide Industries, who initially had a joint venture operation for 2.5 years, and then subsequently to occupy a host of senior management positions within the parent company, leading to his elevation to the board of directors in 2013. He is presently designated as the Deputy Managing Director responsible for automotive, industrial, and submarine strategic business units. Additionally, he is a member on the board of several of the Exide subsidiaries. He is interested in academic pursuits and has been a guest faculty at several management institutions of repute. While Dr. Bobby was mentioning about this VUCA times, leading an organization, the volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So we are very happy to know, like I'm a shareholder of Exide and I keep tracking Exide. So even in this VUCA environment, Exide remains the largest manufacturer of automotive and industrial lead acid batteries. The sales are more than 13,000 crores and the net profit is 750 crores. We really feel good that a Calcutta-based company, though many companies have gone in from Calcutta, Exide remains to have its headquarters in Calcutta with 2 factories in West Bengal. The other good thing about Exide is a very negligible debt it has and a 3-year net profit growth of 11% per annum. It manages around 4,000 employees with a very good industrial relations track record, and the stock market has rewarded it with a market capitalization of more than 13,000 crores, and it enjoys a price-earning ratio of more than 20 times. So I think he will be the right person to tell us that, having led this kind of company, being in the board and being a deputy managing director, how does he manage this very complex organization, the complex competition is coming, and also maybe tell us about in which way the future is moving in terms of supply chain, in terms of technology, in terms of solar power, in terms of HR and marketing. So I think Exide has built a very strong brand equity. Like India moves on Exide, so it has a very strong brand equity. And I had the privilege to do my summer training while at IIM Calcutta from Exide. So Exide is a very dear company to me. So with that, we now would request Mr. Shubhi Chakravarti to give his opening remarks, and we'll of course have question and answers after his presentation. Thank you so much. Welcome, Mr. Chakravarti.
So, thank you, Joynto, for that introduction. And I would like to thank Heritage Business School for inviting me for this session. I hope it will be as rewarding for you as it will be for me while delivering this address, as well as interacting with you during the Q&A session. Now, before I start, I would request all of you to put your microphone on mute, because otherwise there's a lot of echo and maybe you will not be able to hear me as clearly. So now coming to the subject for today is leading an organization in VUCA times. So I'm going to restrict myself to this topic for today and not delve into the larger issues of management of large enterprises. So both Dr. Bobby George and Dr. Joynto Mukhopadhyay have explained to you what VUCA means, so I will not repeat that. But it will be interesting to understand where did this term come from. Now, most of management theories, or many of management theories that you study today, are the byproduct or direct product of the US War Military College. Because a lot of modeling exercises, entire operations research as a subject emanated out of the US Army War College. VUCA is also a term which was coined by them in response to the collapse of USSR in the early 1990s. Because when USSR collapsed, from a bipolar world, it was essentially indicating a slightly confused kind of world, because earlier it was very clear who were the two superpowers. But with the fall of USSR, what happened was US remained the superpower, the only superpower, and there were lots of others like China and so on and so forth, the European Union. So in that context, the US War Military College was trying to understand as to how the future would shape. And in that context, again, they came up with this term, VUCA. Now, this VUCA term came into management literature in 1987. Before that, it was strictly used in military circles. That also, again, in US military circles. There were two professors, Warren Bennis and Burton Nanes. These two people, Warren Bennis is an American scholar who is no more, very eminent American scholar who has written on leadership. And Burton Nanes, again, was a management professor at University of Southern California. These two people have done a lot of work on leadership, and they first coined or adopted this term from the military arena to management theory and to leadership studies. So they wrote a book in 1987 in which this term first came into management literature. Now, if you look at VUCA, there are two things about VUCA which you should try to understand. Basically, it talks about two kinds of matrices. First one is known unknowns, and the second one is unknown unknowns. Now, you may be thinking that I'm playing with words, but let me explain what I'm trying to mean. What are known unknowns? Let me again take an example right out of the military arena. A known unknown is that China will attack India. That is known to our military establishment, or that Pakistan will attack India. Now, what is unknown about it? Unknown entity of this known unknown is that you do not know where they will attack and when they will attack. So that is not known. But you know, and you have to keep yourself prepared. So that's a known unknown. Now, what's an unknown unknown? You may say that if you do not know something, how do you know that you do not know? Well, a typical unknown unknown is something that we are going through right now, which is the pandemic. You never knew that a pandemic will happen and that it will happen out of China and that will affect the world so badly. So this was not known. Both the things were not known. What is going to affect was not known, and where it will happen was not known. And the scale, of course, was not known. So pandemic is an unknown unknown. So how do you manage a situation which is not known at all, or which is in the unknown unknown category? Now, this unknown unknown category is what primarily defines VUCA. So this is what VUCA is all about, the unknown unknowns. Now, the topic today is leading an organization in VUCA times. So what do you do? Suddenly you have been hit by a pandemic all over the world, and lots of disruptions. As Dr. George mentioned, that it leads to disruptive situations. Now, in the normal context, what does leadership mean? In an organizational situation. Essentially, leadership is about translating vision into reality. Of course, it assumes or pre-assumes that you have a vision, and the leadership, which is, kind of decided or approved by the board, and then it's up to the leadership of that company to turn that vision into reality. So this is, in the normal context, this is what leadership is all about in an organizational setting. However, the whole thing changes when you are in VUCA times. Because in VUCA times, you are in crisis. And when you are in crisis, you are not working for the long term. What are you trying to do? You are trying for sustainability. In many cases, you are trying for survival. You are also trying to spot opportunities. Because amidst all this chaos, there are islands of opportunities. You are trying to spot that as a leader. And you are trying to quickly reorganize for the future. So there are 4 things you are trying to do as a leader in a crisis situation. What are those 4 things? I'm repeating again. You are trying for sustainability, which in many cases translates to survival, because as you know, many businesses are struggling to survive. If you are a leader worth your salt, you will utilize this crisis to spot opportunities. You will not say that the skies have come crashing down, there's nothing I can do. There are always opportunities, even amidst a crisis. Whether it's in an organizational context or in a personal context. In a personal context also, there are multiple times when you feel dejected, sad, let down. Some people develop suicidal tendencies, and yet there are opportunities which you can spot as a person. Similarly, in an organizational situation, there are opportunities which you have to spot, if not for you, for your organization. And you have to quickly reorganize for the future. Why you need to reorganize for the future? Because an unknown or a VUCA situation will never bring you back to the original datum line. The datum line will change for sure. So you need to understand what are those signals, and you need to organize yourself for the future. So, how do you do it? Easier said than done, because you may feel that it's very easy for you to say all this, but how do you do it? Well, to me, these are all my personal thoughts, so please feel free to disagree if you wish. The first mark of a leader in an organizational context is that he has to put the organization first. This is very important. If you do not put the organization first, if you are forever scared or you are terribly worried about your personal situation, you cannot lead an organization during a crisis. You have to put the organization first. You have to display, number 2. These are all grandma's, prescriptions. Honesty of purpose and truthfulness. This is very important. I think, now what do I mean by honesty of purpose and truthfulness? If your organization is struggling, if it is sinking under a load of debt, you have to tell your people the real situation. You cannot be hiding facts, because people are anxious, they are hungry for information. You cannot be like the World Health Organization, telling you to wear masks one day, telling you not to wear masks the other day. You cannot be flip-flopping or muddling through an uncertain situation. You have to come out with the facts to your employees. Your employees must know that what is the actual state of affairs and what you are fighting, because the sooner they know what you are trying to counter, what you are trying to combat, the sooner they will be with you. If you are trying to hide facts, they will always think you are keeping things up your sleeve. So that's point number 2. And during this situation, because all of us, as individuals carry our sense of politics to our work sphere. During a crisis, keep that politics at home or keep that politics at bay. Do not let it invade your work sphere, because people below you are smart, are very smart to detect if there are political insinuations or political underlinings in what you are trying to do. So keep that out of the way, because in a normal organizational context, people play political games, and that's okay. People do that all the time. But in a crisis, you cannot be seen to do that as a leader. You have to be fair to all concerned. Number 3, you have to empathize. Why you have to empathize? Because many people may be out of job. So what do? There will be jobs which will not be required, or your organization may not be able to support so many people at this point in time. So you have to work overtime to talk to your people, to empathize with them, to understand their situation, to lessen their pain. This is very important. How do you achieve all this? Through communication. At this point in time, more than ever, you require to be a very good communicator. If you are not a good communicator, you will not be able to communicate all the good things you are trying to do and the hard realities of the situation. So how is communication different during this period? Now, communication can be three ways, as per my opinion. You can be an excellent orator like Barack Obama. He can give a speech for 2 hours without looking at a sheet of paper and be flawless. But everybody is not like that. You can be a good written communicator. Perhaps you can write very well. So maybe if you can do that better than you can speak, then you can communicate through your writings to your people. And one example of this would be Nehru. Nehru was a good orator, no doubt, but I always thought he wrote better than he spoke. So if you are good at writing things down, writing down your thoughts, use that. But to me, the most important way to communicate is through examples. This is very important. If you live your life during a crisis as you want others to lead their lives, there cannot be any better way to communicate. If you want people to be frugal, make sure you switch off the light in your office. Make sure you switch off the AC in your office before you leave. So set examples. One thing you must understand in an organizational context, you can always fool your boss, but you cannot ever fool your subordinates because they are always watching you. If you set the right examples, they will follow. And your body language is very important. Are you sounding confident? Are you sounding brave? Or are you sounding diffident? Are you sounding like a coward? Are you sounding like a person who is going to drop everything off and run away? Your body language is important. You have to be there for your people. And you have to proactively plan for exigencies. How do you do that? Let me give you an example from Exide. In Exide, the highest decision-making body, just below the board is of course the highest decision-making body, but below the board we have what is called the executive committee. So we are very senior people, and the executive directors are also members of this executive committee. Normal practice is to meet once a month and have a whole day meeting assessing the various trends in the economy, sales figures, production figures, HR issues, discuss the whole gamut of all the management issues which have come up during the course of the month. But during a crisis, is meeting once a month enough? So what have we done? You'll be surprised to note that the executive committee is meeting every day. Every day at 12 o'clock we meet. Of course, we meet online because everybody cannot come to office. But every day we meet because every day there are issues to discuss. Every day there are new findings, new things which are happening in the environment where we need to react. And we don't even want to react, we want to proact so that we are one step ahead. And the only way to do it is to have frequent and regular meetings. What else have we done? We have set up a COVID-19 war room in which other departmental heads are members of this. And we are all part of a WhatsApp group. Every day there are postings because we have got 7 battery factories, 3 smelting factories, and 2 electronics factories. So 12 factories, all in different states. And as you are aware, it's a complete chaos out there with central government guidelines, state government guidelines, Gram Panchayat guidelines, municipal commissioners guidelines. Every guideline is different, sometimes they contradict each other. We need to quickly meet, discuss, and take action. This is very important. And for that, you need to meet every day. You need to be alive to the situation. You cannot say that, okay, my meeting is once a month, we'll discuss in the next meeting. It just doesn't work during a crisis. So, and there are people falling ill, they have to be taken to the hospital, various things have to be managed. So, it's a live situation. It's like you are in a circus. You are a trapeze artist, and every move is important. And there is no scope or no ground or no space to relax at any point in time. So, coming to the next point, it's one thing to be able to be alive to a situation, but what do you do with that situation? The next point is you have to be agile to be able to take decisions. This is very important. You cannot suffer from analysis paralysis during a crisis. All of you, I do not know your age profile. People in our age group would have seen this movie Patton, and that was a crisis. So what General Patton did was trying to manage a crisis on the military front. You need to take decisions. You cannot say that, no, let's try to analyze, let's think about it another day, let's generate 10 scenarios. While all that is important, but you need to think on your feet. There is no room for you to go back and ruminate. But what is more important is that you, along with your agility, you need to be able to adapt yourself, because the new environment is not the same environment you are used to. So unless you adapt yourself to a new environment, how do you do all this? So what is meant by adaptation? For example, we are working online now. That's a way to adapt. Your home needs to adapt, your family needs to adapt, you need to adapt. How do you sign papers? The directors, most of the time, they are approving and signing a lot of things. So you devise ways to do it online. So you need to adapt. This is very important. Which brings me to this famous person called Charles Darwin. I'm sure all of you know about it. He was the one who wrote about, who discovered this theory of evolution. And, in 1835, this adaptation is not new. We are talking about it in VUCA times, but this is, as old as Moses. In 1835, Charles Darwin, then a young naturalist, made a voyage in which he stopped in an island called the Galapagos Islands in the Pacific. And there he found traces of species which seemed to be, mid-stage in their evolution, from which he got this idea that perhaps the species on this earth did not descend in their present state and that they evolved from one species to another. And 24 years later, in 1859, he wrote this famous book called The Origin of Species, in which he made a famous quote. It is not the strongest of the species that survives, not the most intelligent that survives. It is the one that is most adaptable to change. So mind you, just because you are strong doesn't mean that you will survive. The dinosaurs were the strongest on this earth. They lived for 179 million years. And yet they perished. You have the ants, which have survived for 66 million years. And then you have the humans, which have survived for slightly less. So, if I look at this data, what is the guarantee that human species will continue to live forever and ever? There is no data to support this. And if we are to survive, we have to adapt. If we cannot adapt to the new environment, we will not be able to survive either this crisis or any future crisis. You must understand one thing, this process of pandemic, it may have hit us in our lifetime and we may be thinking that what is this suddenly, why has God cursed us like this? But you must understand one thing, this is again a process of natural selection, which is there in the origin of species or the process of evolution. People who cannot adapt, or for example, if I take this pandemic as an example, it's a little harsh to say this, but the fact is that people who do not have proper immunity do not deserve to live. Simple. As human beings, we are trying our best, creating vaccines, this, that, various other things. But what is nature trying to do? Nature is saying that if you do not have adequate immunity, you do not get selected for the next role. You perish. And this is how humanity has developed through the ages. This is how the other species have developed. Those who have not been able to adapt have perished on the way. So you must understand one thing, that we may think of ourselves as, a species which is, having commanding presence on this earth belongs to us, and we are kind of determining the fate of other species. It may not be like that. It may just be that we are one of the many species who are inhabiting this earth, and we do not command this earth or this nature. This nature actually commands us. So you have to think of yourselves differently, and this pandemic is making us do that, which is a good sign. So now, I think I might be exceeding my time, but anyway, I have got a few more minutes. Now, if I look at the future, do some crystal ball gazing, what do I see? In an organizational context, and maybe as well in a personal context. Well, if I look at the future, one thing organizations have learned is that liquidity is king. During this crisis, companies which did not have liquidity, companies which are over-leveraged, they were affected the most. So one lesson companies have learned is that you need to have liquidity under your belt. And it is no surprise that a behemoth like Reliance Industries today wants to be debt-free. So if you don't have liquidity under your belt, you are always susceptible in a situation of crisis. This is one lesson companies have learned. Next thing which is going to happen is that households are going to increase their spending on health. Because one thing they have learned, there is no cure for all diseases, and there is no vaccine for every pandemic that happens from now on. But one thing that can save you is your immunity. So how do you develop your immunity? You have more vitamins, more good food, healthy food, more fruits. So people are going to spend, increase their spends on healthy food and on medicines. Next thing which is happening is work from home. This has become cliched because everywhere people are saying that you can work from home, it's no longer necessary to go to office. So this may become a model of the future. Why may? I think it will, in which people will now decide, organizations will decide whether it's necessary for everybody to come every day or they can come once in a while and work from home, and which means that you are talking about distributed leadership models. When you are working from home, somebody is logging in from Delhi, somebody from Chennai, somebody from New York, somebody from Tokyo. What you have essentially in management terms is that you have distributed leadership models. We are not used to this. Not all companies are used to this. Maybe few companies like Levi's and others may be used to this concept of distributed leadership. But now all companies have to get used to it, in which your head of sales may be sitting in Pune, your head of service may be sitting in Calcutta, head of logistics may be sitting in Chennai, and yet they are working together. So this requires a different kind of skill to be able to manage. It is not the same skill sets that you have learned so far in your decades of working in organizations. This requires a different kind of skill set to be able to manage and to be able, particularly for a leader, ultimately a leader has to have persuasive skills because you have conflicting viewpoints in an organization. So to be able to arrive at consensus in a Zoom meeting or a Google Meet, a leader needs to have developed those persuasive skills which he must be able to exhibit online. Because you must understand one thing, the boss, in a physical setting, his body language can be seen by everybody, but here the body language is not always visible. So he has to develop other skills, maybe better communication skills to be able to persuade his team leaders to arrive at a decision. And of course, we are having more and more of digitalization, which means that companies and individuals will be spending a lot of money on getting connected, having a proper internet facility. This is also important for children who are going to schools and colleges, because for them it is important. So households are going to spend a lot of money on internet connectivity and on health because of this. There are certain other things also happening. For example, changes in buyer behavior and read e-commerce. Because of this pandemic, a lot of people have been ordering their provisions, food, groceries, medicines online. And they have suddenly discovered, as I have, that there are many convenient vendors available who are willing to do it for you, who will come up to your house and deliver things as per your requirements, right from food to groceries to fruits, anything you require is today available online. Now, even when the pandemic era or the problem is over, after that also, I suspect those people who have discovered this convenience, they may stick to it. They may not want to go back to the physical experience of having to go to the marketplace every day, trying to shop. They may rely more on e-commerce. And this has great implications for, people who are in the apparel business, people who are in the fashion business, people who are in the, hospitality business, tourism, all kinds of businesses. This has implications for them because it has implications for Exide as well, because during the pandemic, we have been meeting customer requirements at their doorstep. And today that has become the norm because customers expect it. So therefore, we have to configure our service setup, our delivery model so that we are able to deliver these conveniences at the doorstep of the customer. And this is good for us, good for the customer. So these are things that are going to emerge in the future. On the personal front, I think some changes are taking place, as in my personal opinion. People are beginning to question the meaning and purpose of life. People are asking that, what is the purpose of this life? Is it to earn some money? Is it to go to office every day and come back? Is it to go to a mall every evening? Is it to meet up with friends every weekend? Or is there some other purpose in life? Because people have some spare time on their hands now. So people are beginning to question and understand this. And I think individuals are coming up with answers on their own as to how they think they should live their life. Was it worthwhile, for example, to spend 3 weeks on tour and spending only, half a week with your family? Was it really worthwhile? So a lot of people are asking these questions because in a situation of pandemic, when your life is dear, you do not know what will happen tomorrow, your family comes first to your mind. And you are questioning yourself as to, did I do the right thing by spending so much time away, or should I spend more time with my family? So these are questions people are asking themselves, and they are slowly redefining their priorities. So what implications does it have for the organization? It will have implications for the organization in terms of hiring, because when you are going to hire people from now on, you are going to meet candidates who will have very different kinds of priorities. And the organization has to rise to meet up this challenge, because these are not traditional situations that you are going to face from now on. Because somebody might feel that, look, I want to stay in Gurgaon and that's it. My parents are there and I don't want to work far away. So how do I fit in my career within these boundaries? And if an organization wants to recruit a person having a certain kind of skill set, it has to think as to how to utilize those skill sets within those boundaries. And of course, people are seeking, most people I know there have been lots of divorces as well during this period because, people have been holed up in very, very cramped spaces and so on. But mostly, people have redefined their priorities in favor of seeking more family bonding and leisure. Now, work from home, already data is emerging about what are the benefits of work from home. Is it all benefits? Are there some pros or cons? Or is it all pros? So some of the benefits that have already found their way into management literature, it has been found, and this I quote from a study by Boston Consultancy Group. You can read the article if you want. Productivity of employees with optimized remote models, I'm talking about where there is a balance between work from home and work from office, it has gone up between 15 and 40%. So somewhere there is a level of comfort in being able to work partially from home. So because it has given rise to productivity increases. Absenteeism has gone down by 40%. So which means that, if you had a small bit of work at home, earlier you would actually take a day's leave. And I know many organizations which will only allow 1 full day's leave, not half day's leave. So you have to take leave for the whole day. But here, if you are working from home with the permission of your boss, you would be able to adjust or work around that. So you don't have to really, take leave and yet be able to deliver that 8 or 10 hours of work time. Employee turnover has gone down by 10 to 15%, which means homework related, balancing related issues, these are not coming in the way anymore because you can adjust yourself. And there is a 20% plus potential cost reduction in real estate and resource utilization. So you have that data is also starting to come in because you don't need to hire costly space to house your all your employees. And the concept of workplace itself will undergo a change. Maybe you don't have cabins for everybody. You have some workstations and some cabins which anyone can use. In any case, people are using laptops. So all these changes are going to happen. And again, coming to the role of a leader, I think it is important, as I said earlier, it is important for the leader to spot opportunities and trends. So to my mind, these are some of the trends which are going to happen in the future. And it is important for the leader to be able to spot these opportunities and to be able to proact much ahead of the others. Organizations which can proact rather than react will always lead the way. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It was a pleasure giving this talk.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you so much. Very, very, very genuinely a very, very informative thing. One quick question I had as I picked on your topic. You did talk of this Reliance getting into a zero debt company and many companies get into zero debt. But don't you think a company should have certain amount of debt to enjoy financial leverage? Let's say 0.5:1, because otherwise you miss out on the financial leverage totally.
I know traditionally in financial textbooks you will see debt equity ratio 2:1 and stuff like that, or maybe nowadays people are recommending more conservative figures. But the point is that the future has become so uncertain now. This has been a reaction to this pandemic. This is what I feel, that of course Exide has been a debt-free company for a very long time. As a corporate body, we do not believe in debt. But there are companies who have believed in debt. But this pandemic has created such a scare that, if you are not able to service your debt, there is a danger of, various kinds of inquiries. And even before this pandemic happened, companies had started to become wary of taking debt because of various other issues which had started to crop up in the environment in terms of recoveries and so on and so forth. So I think this is a reaction. Whether in the future people will allow or will accommodate a certain kind of debt in their balance sheet, I do not know. But I agree with you that from a financial perspective, it is always better to have a certain amount of debt so that you are able to deliver or derive some kind of financial leverage. It is not a good idea not to have any debt at all, but I do not know. Companies going forward now, after they have been stung by this, I do not know how many companies will have the courage to take on huge debt.
Right.
It's not good news for the banks, though.
Yeah, very bad news. There's a question from Shreya Mitro. She's a MSc Media Science student. She's asking, basically with the advent of VUCA, she is worried about the job security. So she wants to know what will be the state of job security after VUCA.
So I don't know, Ms. Mitro, whether what will happen. But one thing I can say is that there are certain sectors where there will be contraction. I can see that. Which are those sectors? Definitely hospitality sector, tourism sector, airline sector. I do not see in the immediate future, I do not see them going for massive expansion. But there will be a lot of sectors where there will be expansion. I see expansion in e-commerce. I see expansion in home delivery, apps, and any kind of convenience business, in terms of businesses which will be able to configure, providing convenience to customers, one way or the other, will be the ones who will succeed. So, and convenience means servicing at home. So now businesses which will be able to configure that will be successful. Now, very difficult to say how the job market will react. I mostly see that it will be muted going forward because people now, even if the pandemic were to go away, although I have no data as to when it will, but suppose it does, then also people will be reviewing and reassessing their present situation before they go for additional hiring.
Achha, Nandan Sengupta is asking from London that he wants to know your opinion on the emerging automotive market, and with electric cars emerging and now with the pandemic, so how it's going to change the automobile sector and the automobile ancillaries, like even like Excite with
automotive. I'll talk about the broader automotive sector. Automotive sector has suffered a lot on account of various reasons, even before the pandemic, because of the desire to switch to EV and so on and so forth. So there was a lot of uncertainty just previous to the pandemic. Of course, pandemic only added to the woes. Now, going forward, I see that the electrification program will be on, although the pace of acceleration may change a bit in the sense that it may decelerate a bit because of this present pandemic. But the broad direction of going towards electric vehicles, I think, will remain. Whether it will go through the hybridization route to electric vehicles or it will directly go to BEV. India at one point of time wanted to directly scale up to BEV, that is battery electric operated vehicles, without bypassing the intermediate hybrid stage. But now it could be that the hybrid stage may be encouraged because if the graduation had happened directly, then a lot of automotive companies would have suffered a lot or would not have been able to adjust to this new reality so soon. So I think it is going to be graduated. Number one, this shift to electric vehicles. As far as mobility is concerned, as a business, there was a bit of a surprise because when the auto dealerships opened after a long time, much to their surprise, they were flooded with inquiries and footfalls. Because now, on account of this pandemic and this scare of using shared mobility, services or even bus and public transport, people are desperately trying to have their own vehicle, whether two-wheeler or a four-wheeler. So suddenly there was a huge footfall. Whether this will be only temporary for a few months or this will stay, I do not know. But right now, what I've read in the press is that the auto dealerships kind of starved of supplies because, of course, the companies, auto companies have not been operating during this period, so stocks may be a little low. So I do not know how this will happen or how this will take shape in the future. But as of now, the auto industry, once we will know for sure, once all the auto companies start operating in full swing. Right now, most companies are operating at 50 to 70% level, mostly, because there are restrictions on the labor which can come into the factory and so on. So we'll know for sure in a couple of months' time. But earlier, the feeling was that people are moving away from personal vehicles to, shared facilities. But now the move is again towards personal vehicles.
Yes, yes, yes.
And if that happens, then I think pollution is going to increase. So ultimately, there will be a drive towards electrification, which will happen. Only thing is, if it was going to happen in 3 years, now it may take 5 years or 7 years. It will get delayed because of this.
Acha, we have Ololika Poddar. She's from the Heramba Chandra College. So she's outside the Heritage Group. Miss Ololika, do you have any questions since you are a valued guest? So, and Sanjay Mukherjee from Mumbai, would you like to ask anything? Since you are from Mumbai, we would like to give you the first chance. Sanjay is an alumnus of IIM Bangalore. So Sanjay, you can unmute yourself and ask something.
Actually, I wanted to ask the esteemed guest that we are in COVID time, and how is Exide reconfiguring the manufacturing when the crowding is not allowed in the shop floor and only 30% people are allowed? And what is the way forward? I think it is manufacturing 4.0 automation. I want some feedback how Exide is doing or will be doing it in future.
Very good question. Thank you. Very good question.
See, manufacturing, the long-term solution lies in going towards 4.0, of course. But in the short run, we have reconfigured our workplaces to include social distancing and our machine centers. So we have tweaked all that to be able to adjust to the new reality. Also, one of our factories, Taloja, in fact, was inspected a couple of days back by the health authorities and the municipal office, and they were so impressed with the way we were doing. They have actually requested us to counsel, because Bombay, the situation is very bad in Maharashtra. They have requested us to counsel some of the COVID families. Initially, they wanted us to do the counseling by going to their houses, but then because our factories are operating, so they have allowed us to do it online. So they actually have requested for our services to do this counseling to the larger community in and around our factory, so that they can also learn from some of the steps which we are following. So we follow complete sanitization. Our canteens have been reconfigured to provide for this isolation. Our workplaces have been reconfigured. So we have adjusted to this reality. There is no other way in which you can operate, because also we come under essential services in some states because we supply to the defense and submarine batteries and so on. So we have been allowed to operate, but we have to follow all the rules. And fortunately for us, we have not had too many incidences. I will not say there has not been a single incident, but too many incidences, and whenever it has happened, we have taken very prompt action. But to your question, that manufacturing 4.0, yes, that is the way forward, and Exide is very much engaged in this task. But that is something that would take time.
Right.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
One question which is very general in nature, but you can really guide. Ayush is asking from Heritage. He is in first year. So, the question also is concept, how do you decide? As far as those who want to do finance major, they're very clear. But when it comes to between marketing and HR, they are not very clear whether they should go for marketing or HR. So who are the people, Mr. Chakraborty, who should go for the HR specialization?
Well, for HR, if you are interested in HR function, first and foremost, you must have a natural inclination for empathy. If you don't have that, you do not belong to HR world.
Natural inclination for?
Empathy. So if you are someone who is very aggressive, someone who wants to take the bull by its horns, and you have got natural inclination to be you have a lot of aggression in your profile or in your personality, then HR is perhaps not the right, or you would like to dominate all the time. HR perhaps is not a good profession for you, because it is not in tune with your personality. HR is a function where you need to be a good listener. So ask yourself, are you a good listener? Do you listen to people, or you are the first one to jump and start to make your own opinion, sound your own opinion immediately to the group? If you are a person like that, then maybe you belong to marketing or some other function. HR is a function where you need to be patient, where you need to be a good listener, you need to have empathy, and so this is the human resources, OD, talent management. And speaking of that, if you are talking about the IR function which comes within HR, I have made a distinction between IR and HR here. If you are talking about IR, if that is where you want to make a career, then to my mind, IR is an area where you need to be able to live with conflicts and to be able to deal with conflicts. It should not, any kind of conflict, if it affects you deeply and you are unable to sleep, you are unable to take things in your stride, then perhaps IR is not the function for you. In IR, there will be huge amount of conflicts. You have to have a lot of negotiations. You need to be a good negotiator. You need to negotiate. You will have to negotiate with the trade unions, and who can be sometimes very aggressive. You need to be able to maneuver all that. It's a good training ground for a leader, actually, to have a stint in IR and HR. But if you want to make that your career to start with, then you need to possess some of these characteristics. Not that if you don't possess, you will be a misfit, but if you possess some of these characteristics, you will be a natural fit.
Ajay Shonover is asking that though you have very high qualification IIT plus IIM, but everyone still cannot reach the level of deputy managing director. So what is the secret sauce that you have, and you can share so that these boys and girls can nurture, so that they can also join the board of good companies like Excite?
No, why should your boys and girls have the ambition to become deputy managing director? They should have the ambition to become the managing director. So there is no secret sauce. I was lucky. I was at the right place at the right time, and I had good bosses like Mr. Chand. So I cannot give any prescription or any kind of rules which will enable you to climb to the whichever level you want to. You have to take it as it comes, utilize the knowledge you are gaining in business schools, and try to apply it to your work setting.
Mr. Chand, can you hear us? There's a question for you. I think he's going on and off. He came in and went out. Okay. Achha, one question, we have in this faculty meeting. So the one question is coming up that, how to make the academia industry interface a reality. That is the question. And how can, the second question is the academic research that you're doing, how can we make it more relevant for the industry? These are the two things the faculty members in general from Heritage Business School are asking.
Academy industry interface it can always happen. One interface happens in settings like this, where you invite people from industry to come and give a talk. The other interface can happen through, summer programs and so on and so forth, which are the normal routes for doing this activity. So apart from this, if the business school wants to take up some serious research in an area which is of value to the organization, then only the organization will, sponsor it or take interest in it. So it has to be of value to the organization. That what that value will be or what that area will be, that is something that one needs to find out in conjunction with that particular organization that you are interested to talk to.
Mhm. And so Kritika is asking, second year student, then as a student, how does she prepare for the VUCA time? That's what she's asking.
As a student, you need to keep your ears and eyes open, I guess. So you have to also be able to do the same things that people in organizations are doing. You have to spot opportunities. You have to do some crystal ball gazing and judge the future. You have to choose organizations, or you have to choose your own career judiciously, depending on what you think the way the world will shape up. So these are for individuals to decide and to take.
The other question is like when you recruit management trainees, how much weightage you give to academics and how much you give to extracurricular activities like sports, participation in dramatics, or maybe in debates. So what is the general weightage?
Look at the overall profile of the student actually,
Mhm.
and and try to understand as to how best that particular candidate will suit our requirements. Because a candidate is not selected does not mean that he is a bad candidate. It just means that that candidate is perhaps not best suited for a particular organization. And I'm
Hmm.
sure that there will be other organizations where a person, where that candidate will be valued highly. So all of us, I have had many experiences where I have been rejected at interviews. So it does not mean anything. It just means that for that particular company, you are not the right candidate.
Mhm. No, but we have to accept that, in some boys, they are able to get multiple offers from the campus, and some boys, even after 8 interviews, are not able to get. So, and some boys are always able to clear multiple interviews.
Yeah, obviously there are some people who are able to generate a perception that they do. Uh, I would advise all of you, if you are going to attend an interview with a company, please do go through their website and read up the annual report. Try to understand about the company so that you can make a choice, even if you attend the interview, whether the company is the right one for you.
Mhm.
So if you are well prepared, then it's easy for you to uh, create an impression.
Mhm.
And you must understand one thing, that in an interview, the perception is the reality. So based on that, half an hour or 45 minutes interview, people develop a perception about yourself. So if you are well read, if you have done a lot of work on the company and you show your interest, then it creates an impression.
Mhm. And since you have so much experience in marketing also, Ankit Vaidya, student, is asking, how has the job of a sales manager changed over the years?
Sorry, I could not understand. How is the
How has
job
the
of the
job of a sales manager changed over the years? The role
sales
and the...
manager's job has changed dramatically over the years. In the 70s, the sales manager was only an allocation manager because it was a supply staffed economy. So when the sales manager landed at a station, for example, if he landed at Kanpur, all the dealers and distributors would be there with garlands to welcome him, because his only job was to go to that station, and depending on whom he liked, whom he did not like, he would allocate. Because if the demand was 20, what was available was 10. So sales manager assumed a very important my bap role in as far as the dealers were concerned in those days, because it was a supply starved economy. Over a period of time, it became a demand led economy, and supply starvation was not there, because we, as a country, like I can tell you, when I was a young kid, you had to wait for 5 to 8 years for a Bajaj scooter. So it was not that you could go into a dealership and just buy a scooter like you do today. You have to book, pay advance, and then wait for 5 to 8 years. Ambassador car, similar, wait for 3, 4 years, and your turn would come, then you would be able to get that product. So those days we have left those days behind. Now, the sales manager in those days had only an allocation job. Over a period of time, as the supply side improved, then the sales manager had to do selling. And of course, now the job of the sales manager has changed dramatically, because you have a whole lot of analytics which is helping him. Earlier, sometime in the 90s and so on, you didn't have so much of data analytics. But now with the ERP systems in place in almost all companies, you have SAP and so on, so Oracle, so you have a lot of data actually, and you have to do intelligent selling now because the data actually is getting more and more refined, and there's a lot of artificial intelligence built into the data. So as a result of which you know exactly what to do. And the job has gone from allocation to now intelligent selling because you know now you have to do that. If you cannot analyze data, if you cannot do some intelligent data work, you will not be able to succeed in a sales manager's role in the present context. And going forward, it is only going to increase. This requirement is only going to increase.
Mhm. And Anirban is asking, he's a student of first year, so he's saying that he's not strong in mathematics and quantitative skills. So not very strong. So should he at all take up finance, or finance is a no-no? Because he's liking finance in the second semester, but because in class 12 and others graduation he was not good in mathematics. So quantitative skills. So should he at all take up finance or no?
This I cannot say. I think you must ask your faculty.
Yes.
I won't be able to tell you whether you should take up finance or not take up finance. Consult your faculty. Okay, Joyanto, I have another meeting.
Okay. Okay.
Another 5 minutes. So.
Achha, one last question. Dr. Bobby Basu, our faculty only, is asking. She's worried about this global supply chain network being broken because of the pandemic. So when do you think she will get restored? Dr. Bobby is asking.
Well, as I said, the datum line is not going to be the same because, as you know, a lot of the supply chain pre-pandemic was some way or the other involved China. But now, thanks to the pandemic and all that has happened, particularly in the Indian context, people are quickly trying to find out new alternatives to this Chinese equation. Because if you live with China and tomorrow there is a war, you won't be able to produce anything. So now people went to China because of cost, but now people are thinking that cost perhaps is not the only factor. There are other geopolitical factors which have to be taken into account, and hence one must look beyond China and have a more balanced supply chain situation. So this is happening, and I think going forward, it will definitely change to the extent that people are going to hedge their risks and not be fully China-centric. So this is definitely going to happen, and more, and particularly because now China and US are not on the same terms, and the European Union, UK and US, they're always kind of one block. And India, as you know, the situation is not that hunky-dory with China. And also we have the other Far Eastern countries who are also having difficulties with China. So I think the supply chain globally is going to change in the coming years. It's not going to be totally cost, dictated by cost only.
I think we have almost come to the end. So thank you so much. You really illustrated your points very well. In the chat box, I see a lot of people thanking you very profusely, right? So I'll just ask our faculty, Dr. Shoma, to propose a formal vote of thanks.
Our honorable speaker, respected dignitaries, respected directors, sir, respected faculty colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, and my beloved students. Good afternoon. It's my privilege to have been asked to propose a vote of thanks on this occasion. I, on behalf of Heritage Business School and its entire fraternity, webinar supporting team, and on my own behalf, extend a very hearty vote of thanks to Mr. Subir Chakravarti, Deputy Managing Director, Excite Industries Limited, who instead of his busy schedule, joined us today to grace the occasion and share with us his vast corporate understanding, findings, and opinions today. I must mention our deep sense of appreciation for Mr. Subir Chakravarti for sharing his vast experience and explain to us as how to lead an organization in VUCA times. Sir, you explained very lucidly the origin and the meaning of the word VUCA to us. We are really enriched with your insightful thoughts on where the leaders must focus during this pandemic situation. As you informed us that leaders during this time must focus sustainability, survival, and spot the right opportunities and quickly reorganize things. It is comprehended from your deliberation that communication with example, honesty, transparent communication to the workforce, proper body language, and to be adaptive into this situation will be the most needed personality traits for the successful leaders in this post-COVID situation. Thank you, sir. We are really enlightened with your illustrations about how the organizations as well as the people they are changing and how it is going to impact the hiring and the other organizational aspects. Thank you, sir. Finally, I'd like to take this opportunity to place on record our hearty thanks to the Director HBS, Professor JNM, for his unparalleled support and guidance.